Welcome to English Story Vault, where you can level up your English through slow, clear, and fun stories. Just listen, relax, and enjoy the journey. Chapter 1. Unrest in the Nation. The country wasn't calm. It was facing numerous problems and disagreements. Across the nation, people held differing views on critical matters, making it difficult to agree on a way forward. Los Angeles, a large city, felt this tension acutely. Life there was turbulent. Strong feelings about various issues often led to conflict, causing people to take to the streets and protest. Protesting is how people express their views and demand change, exercising their right to free speech and assembly. However, reports indicated that some of these protests in Los Angeles turned difficult, involving problems and occasional violence, which made the city's situation tense and uncertain. Then, something surprising happened. News broke that U.S. Marines would be deployed to Los Angeles. This was unusual. Soldiers typically serve overseas for combat, training, or aid. Sending them to a major American city was an unprecedented step. The stated reason for the deployment was the protests. The Marines would help protect federal buildings and government workers in the city, aiming to manage the situation. This decision sparked important questions nationwide about power and rights. Who has the authority to deploy military soldiers within their own country? Is this power solely the president's? What about state and city leaders? Did the mayor of Los Angeles or the governor of California consent to this decision or request federal assistance? Concerns also arose about the right to protest. Americans have the right to peaceful protest, a vital part of their freedom of expression. What happens to this right when military personnel patrol the streets? Does it make protesting harder or more dangerous? Questions also emerged about the different levels of government. The federal government in Washington, D.C., state governments like California's, and city governments like Los Angeles. Who should manage internal state or city problems? Should the federal military intervene, or should local police and state aid handle such situations? The news of the Marines' arrival in Los Angeles wasn't minor. It highlighted significant national problems and disagreements. It underscored the tension between the federal, state, and city governments. It also showed how citizen protests could trigger profound and serious government decisions. The soldiers' arrival signified a major shift in Los Angeles. This event thrust critical questions about power, civil rights, and governmental roles directly into the city streets. This story begins with this surprising news, detailing subsequent events, the official reasons for the deployment, the strong reactions from state and city leaders, the ensuing legal battles, and the city's atmosphere during these occurrences. This first chapter sets the scene for a difficult period in Los Angeles and for the country, a time when the use of the military domestically became a widely debated topic. The surprising news about the soldiers initiated a period where national disagreements converged in Los Angeles, making questions of power, protest, and government roles central to the unfolding narrative. Chapter 2. The Order Comes Down President. Trump, serving his second term, made a highly significant and surprising announcement. He would personally send U.S. Marines to Los Angeles. The Marines, known for their strength and readiness for difficult missions, were to be deployed. The government provided specific reasons for this decision. They cited ongoing protests in Los Angeles against ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which handles immigration laws and enforcement. The government claimed some protests had become violent and disruptive, with images and reports confirming trouble in parts of the city. Given this situation, the president decided to deploy the Marines, asserting it was necessary to restore order and security. The Marines' primary mission was clearly outlined: to protect federal workers and federal government buildings in Los Angeles. These workers are national government employees, and the buildings include critical offices where they perform their daily duties. The government stated the Marines were needed because the protest situation posed a danger to these individuals and properties, emphasizing that the goal was protection and safety. Initial reports about the deployment mentioned approximately 500 active-duty Marines. However, the Department of Defense later updated this number to about 700 Marines in total. These 700 Marines were preparing at their base far from Los Angeles to travel to the city and fulfill the president's order. This order meant that military soldiers would be on the streets of an American city, a highly unusual situation for the country. Immediate discussions arose about the reasons behind this deployment and its implications for the city and its residents. The president's order was clear and public. The Marines were coming to Los Angeles to address the situation, according to official government announcements. The city waited anxiously to see what would unfold after this significant decision from the highest level of government. It was a moment that profoundly shifted the atmosphere in Los Angeles, as the arrival of the Marines was now imminent. This was the order that came down. Chapter 3. Pre-existing tensions before the soldiers were ordered to deploy, the city was already in turmoil. Residents were unhappy about various issues and were actively protesting. These protests primarily focused on immigration, specifically challenging existing immigration rules and the actions of ICE. Many felt ICE was treating people unfairly, leading them to the streets with signs and marches, voicing their opinions. Most of these protests were peaceful, aimed simply at sharing a message. However, at times the situation escalated. There were reports of some protests turning violent, involving fighting or property damage, ceasing to be peaceful. When violence erupted, the police intervened, reportedly using special equipment like rubber bullets, which can injure but are typically non-lethal, and loud deterrents to disperse crowds. This demonstrated the difficult and sometimes dangerous situation in the city. These protests had been ongoing for days, with reports of more violence on Sunday night, and continued into Monday, though some described Monday's protests as calmer. Despite this, the city remained tense and worried, with widespread aversion to the conflict. Los Angeles city leaders were also engaged in discussions about the situation. They were already dissatisfied with the federal government's actions, feeling that Washington, D.C. was making decisions affecting Los Angeles without prior consultation. They believed the federal government was exacerbating the problems. Thus, even before any soldiers arrived, Los Angeles was a city experiencing unrest, street protests, some turning violent, and palpable tension between the populace and the government. There was also significant friction between city leaders and the federal government. The city was already on edge, with widespread uncertainty about the future. This difficult urban environment formed the backdrop for the president's significant decision, a time when the city was already grappling with numerous problems and strong disagreements. The atmosphere was far from calm. It was a city dealing with anger and fear. Chapter 4. A state pushes back upon. Hearing the news about the Marines, Governor Gavin Newsom of California reacted swiftly and strongly. He vehemently disagreed with the president's decision to send soldiers to Los Angeles, deeming it a very bad and wrong idea. Governor Newsom used powerful language to convey his sentiments, accusing the president of acting like a dictator, a leader with absolute power who disregards others' opinions and rules. Newsom asserted that the president should not use the military in this manner domestically. He explained that the U.S. Marines have a crucial role to protect the United States from foreign enemies and defend democracy and freedom globally. Governor Newsom praised the Marines as heroes serving the country well, but he firmly stated that these brave soldiers are not political pawns, pieces moved for personal gain. Newsom felt the president was exploiting the Marines for his own political agenda, not for genuine safety, and declared that sending them onto American streets against American citizens was wrong. Governor Newsom believed this action constituted a blatant abuse of power, a clear and improper use of authority. He called the president's decision un-American, arguing it violated the country's core ideas and values. Due to his strong conviction, Governor Newsom announced that California would fight back by taking immediate legal action. He vowed to go to court, asking judges to determine the legality of the president's order and seek a court order to stop the federal government's plan to deploy the Marines. He announced California would file a lawsuit against the president's administration. This was a significant step, clearly demonstrating the profound disagreement between the state and federal leaders. The governor's swift and forceful reaction highlighted the major conflict between the state and federal governments. He firmly believed the president was wrong to use the military domestically in this situation, feeling it violated important rules and traditions. Governor Newsom implied that the president's official reasons for sending the Marines were not the true motivations, suspecting other, likely political purposes. He did not believe the deployment was genuinely about public safety and was determined to legally stop the president's plan. The state of California was pushing back against the federal government's order, with Governor Newsom ready to use the legal system to protect his state and its citizens, convinced the president's command was illegal under national laws. This disagreement was now headed to the courts, marking the state's first major move in opposition to the federal government's action. Chapter 5. Local leaders speak. Local leaders in Los Angeles also voiced their concerns about the news. Mayor Corinne Bass expressed strong feelings regarding the soldiers' impending arrival. City leaders were deeply worried because a major decision to send soldiers to their city had been made without any prior consultation with them. They felt it was wrong for the federal government to deploy military forces without engaging them, considering this lack of communication a significant problem that made them feel ignored. Mayor Bass declared the decision to send soldiers entirely unnecessary, calling it an unnecessary escalation, meaning it worsened an already difficult situation without cause. City leaders felt the decision added more problems and tension. She also described it as political theater, suggesting it was a show for political gain rather than a genuine safety measure. The city leaders believed the stated reason for sending troops was not the real one. Mayor Bass held a press conference to articulate her views, clearly stating that President Trump was increasing tension in the city and directly blaming him for intensifying problems and difficult feelings. Observing the chaos in Los Angeles, she claimed the government was causing it by sending soldiers, believing their actions were creating more disorder for the city. Mayor Bass asserted that sending soldiers was not about public safety, but about another, perhaps political agenda. She felt the government's focus was misdirected and unhelpful to the people of Los Angeles. Other city leaders echoed the mayor's sentiments, believing that federal troops would significantly complicate matters, potentially increasing anger and upset among residents. They worried it could make the situation more, not less, dangerous. They thought the federal government was causing trouble by deploying soldiers without consulting the city first, believing these actions were not helping the city at all, but instead escalating tensions and creating new problems for everyone. The leaders of Los Angeles felt they understood their city best and should have been involved in the decision-making process. They disagreed that sending soldiers was the correct approach to manage the situation, considering it a mistake with negative consequences. They believed the government was wrong to send soldiers without their consent, and that it was not a good idea for the city and its people. They wanted the government to acknowledge their concerns and feelings about this major decision. The mayor and other leaders spoke clearly and strongly, aiming to inform everyone of their opposition to federal troops coming to Los Angeles and their worries about soldiers appearing on their streets. They hoped their words would make a difference and potentially alter the situation. They strongly felt the government's action was unhelpful and was worsening the situation, creating more problems for the city and its residents. It was a very difficult time for city leaders, who felt compelled to speak up for their city and protect its interests. They had to publicly state their disagreement with the government's decision, believing it was crucial to share their opinion. The leaders in Los Angeles were unequivocal. They were unhappy with the decision to send troops, deeming it the wrong course of action for their city. They believed it caused more problems than it solved and was not about public safety. They sought to protect their city and its people from further tension and difficulty, feeling the government was hindering them from doing so. They believed the government's actions were making things harder for everyone in the city. Their message was clear. The troops were unwelcome and causing trouble. Chapter 6. Marines prepare for deployment. Around 700 Marines were ordered to prepare for a mission. Located at 29 Palms, California, these soldiers are part of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. They received the order to go to Los Angeles, marking a significant step in the government's plan to send military assistance to the city. Their primary role was to support other federal forces already present in Los Angeles, known as Task Force 51. Task Force 51 was already in the city to protect federal personnel and buildings, and the Marines would join them, working together to secure these federal locations and individuals during a period of tension. There were many questions regarding what the Marines would do upon arrival. Lawyers were diligently working on crucial guidelines for the Marines, known as rules of engagement. These rules dictate how soldiers should act, outlining their permissible actions and when they can use force, particularly important if they encounter protesters or difficult situations. The lawyers were still finalizing these rules, reviewing laws to ensure the guidelines for using military force domestically were accurate and clear. This meant the exact operational plan for the Marines was not fully complete, even as they prepared. The Marines were getting their equipment ready and preparing to travel from their base at 29 Palms to Los Angeles. This preparation occurred while city residents and state leaders discussed the decision to send soldiers, questioning its necessity or helpfulness. The Marines were simply following orders from the federal government, preparing for their mission in the city. This was a major step in the plan. 700 soldiers were getting ready to soon be in Los Angeles, with their rules of engagement still being finalized by government legal teams. It was a time of waiting and preparation for the soldiers as they got ready to enter an already tense city. Their focus was on readiness and understanding their orders, even as the specific details of their actions were still being determined by legal teams. They were preparing to join existing federal forces to provide additional protection for federal property and personnel in Los Angeles. The 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, was gearing up for this new and unusual domestic mission, preparing to be part of the federal response in the city. Chapter 7. Going to Court. California vehemently disagreed with the decision to send soldiers and decided to fight it legally. The state went to court, filing a lawsuit, a formal document presented to initiate a legal case, against President Trump's administration. California sought a court ruling that sending the Marines was unlawful. The state government argued that the president lacked the authority to deploy soldiers in this manner within California, asserting that Marines are intended for foreign conflicts, not domestic issues. California also posed another crucial question to the court. Who controls the state's own soldiers? The National Guard. While the governor of California typically leads the National Guard, the federal government can sometimes assume control. California's lawsuit asked the court to determine whether the state or federal government held primary authority in this specific situation. While California pursued legal action, President Trump also publicly criticized the governor, using unkind language and even suggesting the governor should be arrested, though he didn't specify why. This clearly demonstrated the immense disagreement between the state and federal governments. This part of the story delves into fundamental questions of the country's laws. Can a president deploy Marines into a state without the state's consent? Who truly holds power when a state government and the federal government are at odds? Who controls a state's soldiers like the National Guard? The lawsuit initiated a legal battle to answer these important questions. The court would need to examine the laws and decide which party was in the right. This was a serious escalation in the disagreement over the soldiers' deployment to Los Angeles. Chapter 8. A City on Edge. The city of Los Angeles felt deeply uncertain. Residents had many thoughts about the prospect of soldiers, Marines appearing on their streets. The thought of seeing military uniforms in their neighborhoods caused widespread worry. It was an unsettling feeling for the city. Prior to this, there had been protests, and some reports indicated these protests had become calmer, yet the federal government was still sending troops. This felt like a serious and significant event to the people of Los Angeles, making the city feel tense rather than safe and calm. City leaders believed that the arrival of federal troops was exacerbating the situation, adding to the trouble and increasing tension within the city. The Marines were preparing to work with other federal troops, further amplifying the sense of an impending, potentially volatile situation.